I'm Raph. I'm currently a designer at Jawbone, makers of the Jambox and a bunch of wearable devices. And before that, I was in the startup scene in San Francisco. And yeah, I've been designing since 2001. Excited to show you guys some UX techniques. So I think we're just going to get started. For those of you who were yesterday, who were here yesterday, thank you for coming back. For those of you who are new, can't wait to get to know you guys. Yesterday, we did a quick tour through a few useful frameworks. The most useful framework being the idea that in good design, you say no to a heck of a lot more things than you say yes to. And you generate 1,000 no's for every yes. We talked about how a junior designer is someone who just kind of comes up with something and just goes in a weird squiggly line and never really says no to anything, doesn't really have a process, and just stops when time runs out. And a senior designer is someone who is very methodically coming up with ideas, trying out a bunch of things, saying no a lot, picking the things that work, trying a bunch of things, saying no a lot to the things after that thing, and then just continuing on this path of coming up with options and being very rigorous about choosing the ones to move forward on, and also being very rigorous about which things to focus on. And we looked at a couple of frameworks. We looked at a framework called the Balanced Breakthrough Model. That's about how good design is when you make something not just that users love, but that's also technologically feasible and is also business viable. Because if those three pillars don't support the design, it's going to collapse in some way. If it's not business viable, you won't be able to make money off it, or it won't be able to support itself. If it's not technologically feasible, you come up with the coolest thing in the world. Unfortunately, you won't be able to ever make it. And if users don't love it, then good luck. And we talked about experience modeling, which is another model that helps you to make sure that you don't miss anything. And that whereas most people focus on just the core of any experience, like sipping a cup of coffee, I only care about the coffee. Sleep, I care only about the night. Designing transportation, I only pay attention to what's happening when I'm inside the taxi. Great designers look at everything that happens before leading up to the experience and what happens afterwards that leads you back into it over time. And then we all went and we slept. And today, we're going to focus on some exercises. So today's going to be a little bit like coming to the gym with your, if you've ever had a personal trainer or someone, or taken a gym class, or someone who's going to take you through a bunch of exercises real fast, make you sweat. This is what it's going to feel like. We have a lot of different models that we use every day, and that are incredibly useful, and that we want to run you through really fast. So that you can get that muscle memory and learn by doing what it feels like to do great design. So it's going to be really practical, and hopefully you'll have a lot of fun. So I'm going to pass it over to Saj, who's going to intro them, and we'll just get started.
Awesome. Yeah, that's a great introduction, Raph. Thank you, sir. So can people that were in teams yesterday raise their hands really quickly? People that were here, they worked in teams. Can anybody want to shout out the project area that you guys were working on yesterday? Flasks. Anything interesting that you talked about, or any insights that you had yesterday when you were talking about flasks and using these models?
I mean, the flask from entering, what we thought that as a user, usually we will see that the transportation from home to office will be spilling, and the fact that once you finish the drinking, you probably have to bring it back home, so that's another issue. So these are the things that we saw that probably people need to understand.
Awesome. And sorry, your name again was? Ahmed. So Ahmed's talking about transporting the flask from home to work and then it being dirty afterwards. Awesome. Anybody else have a project area that they'd love to enlighten us on real quickly? Come on, somebody else that worked on something interesting. I know there was cloud storage that was being talked about over here. Awesome. So you guys talked about Dropbox yesterday. We also had, I asked if you might be willing to do a small assignment yesterday in the afternoon. Did anybody get a chance to actually observe somebody working with the area of their project? Okay, not a problem. So we'll start off and we'll pick up from where we left off yesterday. Yesterday we got into a lot of the theory, talked a lot. Today is going to be all about doing. So in front of you, all of you guys should have some worksheets. Does anybody not have a worksheet in front of them? So we're going to be moving rapidly through each one of these. The point is just to get some quick exposure. So after today, you'll have tried out every single one of these frameworks in front of you, and tomorrow you'll be able to apply them to whatever project you're actually working on. So we're going to be moving very, very quickly and be moving through the room. Feel free to ask us any questions along the way, but the point is we may not be able to do very, very deep thinking in each one of these areas, but you'll be able to understand it in a way that you'll be able to apply it to whatever project you want to in the future. All right, so yesterday we talked about the 5E model, and one of the questions was, well, what does this look like in actual practice? It's really interesting in a worksheet, but you actually use it? So this is a picture from a project that I worked on over at Yahoo. So we were going through and trying to understand the video experience. And after we did all sorts of research, really understood people, what we did was we broke their user experience into 5 different steps. So what you see up here on the wall is we have a whole bunch of different insights, observations that we had in the field, and we broke it up into these 5 steps of creating video. So first you have create, you have publish, you have promote, you have this feedback step, and then lastly you have this payoff step. So using the 5E model, we brought in all the product managers, all the engineers on the team. We said, you know, you guys were out there with us, observing these users in the field, watching them make video. Here's how we're thinking the video experience looks like. And so we brought them in, we took them through these different observations, and we let people look at these different insights that we had in the field, and we were able to think together about what the actual problem that we were trying to solve was. So after we used this 5E model together, we were able to get this group mind where we all had this common understanding of how people experience video, and the next day we did exactly what we're going to do today, which is start coming up with ideas using that common understanding. So it was a pretty powerful tool, and I totally suggest it. So when you're going back to work with your own teams, using things like the 5E model can help you really understand the problem together as a team. So any questions about that, or anything that looks interesting up here, or is this completely boring? So we're going to move past the 5E model to talk about how we start using those insights that we've had and start coming up with actual ideas. So in front of you, you should have your first worksheet, which is called the 3 Whys. So what the point of this is, yesterday we had all these different insights that we saw, these pain points that we identified when we used the 5E model. What we're going to do now is take those observations and take them one step deeper. So a really powerful tool as a designer is your own intuition. So now that you've noticed things or you've written things down in your 5E model yesterday, the next step is to use your own intuition to take that one step deeper and start asking why. So does anybody have an observation or a pain point that they noticed yesterday when they were making their 5E model that they would be willing to talk about? So one group yesterday, you guys were working on the flask. One of your observations was that when people are moving from home to the office, was it that they were having trouble actually moving from the home to the office?
Yeah, you have to put it in your car.
Mm-hmm.
One thing is you have to hold it, so then you have to put it in your car, and then or probably if you're traveling, then you have to hold it while you're in your bus or whatever, or even walking. So sometimes it will spill, so these are the things that we observe. Or if you put it in your bag, then it will just, mess your bag then. So I think that's one of the things that we observe.
Okay, so the observation in this case is what actually happened. So we see people, when they're moving from their home to their office, they wanted to take their flask and put it inside of their bag, and get it to the office, but there's all sorts of problems. So what we can do is we can ask ourselves, why do we think that this person wanted to put it in their bag as opposed to carry it in their hand? So why do you think that they might have wanted to put it in their bag instead of carry it in their hand?
Yeah, because you only have two hands to actually deal with. So probably it's a bit troublesome to actually. So usually for me personally, I would just put everything in a bag. Then my hands are just empty.
Okay, so when Ahmed's moving from his home to his office, he wants to make sure his hands are free, but he still wants to bring his coffee with him. So the next step is then we go one step deeper, and I'm trying to understand, why is it important that you have your hands free when you're moving from your home to the office, but you still want to have your coffee with you? So why is it important to have your hands free?
Yeah, because I tend to forget things, that's one. And then I will always have, I have to deal with getting to the car, and then I have to drive. Well, mainly is because I always forget that I leave things, if I put this and then suddenly I want to do my shoes, and then, oh, okay, I forgot my coffee then, yeah.
So this is great. So we're going one step deeper now. So the reason why is, well, it sounds like lots of times you're forgetful in the morning. So you want to be able to bring your coffee from home to work, but you also want to make sure you're not forgetting other things. So as we go deeper, we get to these more interesting places for when we come up with ideas. So the last step of this is we're going to go one step deeper. So we're going to go ask why one more time. So why is it important, or why do you think you sometimes forget things when you're on your way from your home to your office?
Probably rushing, probably too many things in your mind.
Great. So now, after we ask why one more time, we can understand what are the real issues here. So when you're going from your home to your office, you have a lot of things on your mind, but you want to still be able to bring your coffee. So now when we're trying to think of new ideas, we can say, well, how can we help people get caffeine with them when they get to work, even though they have all sorts of other things on their mind? So then when we start coming up with ideas, maybe it's things like, maybe it's an iPhone app that's actually a to-do list that is really helping you keep track of all the things that you need from your going to your home to your office. That's the actual problem. So by asking why a few times and using our own intuition, we can start to come up with a more interesting problem space for coming up with ideas. Does that make sense? Yeah? Are you guys, any questions? I know this is getting pretty theoretical. Please. So the observation, great question. So the question is the observation the feature? So the observation is actually the thing that the person is doing. So this is starting with user-centered design. So we didn't get a chance to actually see people using the problems or the areas that we're looking at, but we did go through this 5E model to try and remember our own experiences. So we want to start with an observation or something that we remember about our own experiences in this problem area. So maybe with cloud storage, maybe one of those steps in that 5E model was putting a file into a Dropbox folder. So once we start with that observation, we then ask, well, why is it that it was really tough for us to put files inside of our Dropbox folder when we're on the go? Well, because Dropbox doesn't have a very good iPhone app, and I have other iPhone apps running. Well, then we can ask why about that, and we can go one step deeper. So that's kind of the point of this exercise.
Yeah, it's worth reiterating a great phrase from yesterday. Fall in love with the problem, not the solution. If you have a feature and you don't know what problem it's solving, then you probably don't need that feature.
That's a great point. Please.
It's so related. The 5 whys from Kaizen serves the same purpose, which is to understand the deeper reason behind something. Now, in Kaizen, you're using it to design, it's literally a design thing. In Kaizen, you're using it to design a better production process.
And is everybody familiar with Kaizen? Okay, Raph, if you can.
So Kaizen is a method of continuous improvement, usually applied to production processes, factories, that kind of stuff. And the idea is that whenever something goes wrong, you don't fix the thing that went wrong. Like if someone dropped a hammer on the production line and the hammer got stuck somewhere later down the line, you don't punish the guy who dropped the hammer. You ask, why did you drop the hammer? Well, I dropped the hammer because I was holding it while I was assembling this other thing with my knee, because I didn't have enough hands. And you're like, oh, well, why were you holding the hammer while you were doing this other thing? I was holding it because I had nowhere to put it, because the piece of machinery I'm working on is at an angle, and I don't have any desk space. I don't have anything horizontal. Yeah, so why don't you have anything where you can put it? Well, because of the way it's built. And so instead of blaming the person, you might then ask, well, maybe we can put somewhere that the hammer can attach to, so that while you're doing the other part of your task, the hammer cannot fall inside of the production line. And that was only after 3 whys. Sometimes if it's more complicated, you want to keep asking. So yeah, if you want to ask 5 whys, you could totally ask 5 whys. It'll get pretty deep, though.
My question is, when the moment you do deeper and deeper, and you may deviate also, like in this particular case of Flask, you may end up, isn't it better to take memory pills rather than, it's like creating from the actual, I mean, hammer is a problem, but maybe, you get down with maybe your shoes. I don't know.
Okay, so
my question is there a chance of deviating from the actual what we're trying to achieve rather than?
So that's actually incredibly insightful, because what you're trying to achieve, you have to decide what the scope, and this is a separate topic from this, but imagine you're a company that only makes flasks, then you probably don't want to deviate too much, because if you come up with sleeping pills, then you're not going to be able to go into that business line. But if you have more time and more resources, say you're a startup and you don't know what you're going to do, then you absolutely want to do that, because you otherwise would have spent all this time designing a better flask when a different product would have done a better job. So yeah, definitely. You can go too deep, but how deep is too deep depends on how much time you have, how many resources you have, what's at your disposal, et cetera, et cetera.
It's a great point. One of the notes that
Thank you.
Yeah, one of our professors used to always talk about was, once you start, and once the why, the answer to the why is self-actualization, then you've gone too deep. So you want to make sure that it's deep enough that you're getting to a really human, really trying to understand who these humans are that you're building for, but still relevant to the area that you're building for. So we're going to go ahead and give this a try. It's going to be tough, but we'll be walking around to help you out. So for those of you that weren't with a team yesterday, look around to your left or right, find one of the teams that you can join.
Say hi to each other, find out each other's names.
Always a great start. And jump right in, pick out one of the observations or pain points that you noticed yesterday's during your 5E model, and start asking 3 whys around that. We're going to go through a quick brainstorming exercise that Google Ventures uses for all their teams. And it's called Crazy Eights. So this is going to be on your next page. There's been a whole lot of research done on brainstorming. And some of the most recent stuff has found out that the traditional brainstorming that lots of groups do is they sit around in a room, and you throw out ideas with each other, and it works all right. The problem is, though, sometimes someone who may have a really good idea, but they haven't really thought it out yet, they might feel scared to be able to share their idea too early. So one solution that Google has found that's really useful is let people individually take some time to come up with their own ideas, and then afterwards share them out. So that's what we're going to do here. Another really big insight from a lot of this research is there's a power of quantity over quality. So a great study was once done where they took 2 classes, two classes that were making pottery. One class's goal was to make the very best pot within a semester's time. The second class's goal was to make as many pots as possible. So they ran these 2 classes at the same time, and at the end of the semester, there's the one team that had crafted this one perfect pot, and another class that had just created dozens of different pots. And what they found out was the team that made dozens of pots ended up actually making a better pot than the group that made just one pot. So the idea here is these ideas are really cheap. The goal is just to make as many as possible and let them be as crazy as possible. And while they might sound silly, as we refine that pot, we get to a better final idea. Does that make sense? Cool. So with Crazy Eights, what we're going to do is you've been working as a group so far. You have this great generative question, this how might we question, and we're going to use that to start thinking of ideas. So you should have a sheet of paper with 8 slots inside of it. What we'll do is we'll take 30 seconds for you to sit down and think of an idea that relates to that how might we. After that 30 seconds, we'll move on to the next box. Think of a brand new idea. After that 30 seconds, we'll do it again. So we'll do that for 4 minutes straight, and at the end, you'll have 8 ideas. And these might be crazy, silly ideas. The idea here is to make as many as possible. And after that, we'll share them out quickly. You'll share out your favorite ideas with the rest of your team, and we'll do it one more time. Does that make sense? Okay, so we'll be up here, and we'll be marking off those 30-second periods. And we'll let you go ahead and come up with ideas. And remember, this is you coming up with ideas by yourself. Yeah?
Starting now.
Are you guys ready? So let's take a quick minute, actually 10 seconds amongst your group. Pick out a how might we question that you guys all want to work on. So quick 10 seconds, decide on a how might we question. You got a question? All right, you guys ready to start? So we're going to go ahead and get started no matter where we are. A question over here, real quick. What's that? So the objective, a question was, what's the objective of this? Well, the objective is to come up with as many possible little ideas that we'll then take and we'll put together to come up with a better idea. And this can be just around that how might we. It can be a product, it could be a service, anything that you can imagine that could help that user out. Does that make sense? Okay, so we're going to get started in 3, 2, 1, and start. Got them? So everybody pick out 1 to 2 ideas, no more. And what you're going to do is you're going to go one by one inside of your groups and talk about your 1 or 2 ideas. So each person has exactly 30 seconds to talk about their idea, and then we're going to take 20 seconds to get some feedback on it. So pick out one person, and you have 30 seconds to talk about what your idea, share it out with somebody else, and nobody else should be talking at this point. I'm noticing I'm being a little harsh with you guys about making sure that you're all writing down your own ideas and you're working by yourself during these periods. The biggest reason is, while this is going to be useful today, it's going to be most useful when you bring it back to your teams. And this is the best way to get all those ideas out of those engineers in your room. The product manager that doesn't like to talk a lot, he's probably got a lot of great ideas inside of his head. And by doing activities like this, it lets that person write those ideas, draw pictures of it, and gives them a voice. So this makes sure everybody in your team is part of that process, they feel included, and you get all of their ideas in your final product. This process is probably my favorite ideation process for getting an entire group of people feeling more involved, feeling like they're more of this design process. So a lot of times what you'll run into is you're maybe the only designer, the only person with any UX experience. And so how do you bring it back to your team? It's with really simple frameworks like this. Cool, so now you all should have somewhere between 8 and 16 different little Post-it notes in front of you. What you want to do now as a group is, we've got a whole bunch of ideas, you've talked about them a little bit. Now it's time to start kind of grouping them together. So what we want to do is each one of you pick out your favorite 2 Post-its, bring them back to your team, and try and figure out which ones are related. And how we're going to do that is we're going to try and figure out which ones are solving similar problems. So if you turn to that next page on your worksheet, you've got this clustering sheet. So you want to start out with which ideas are a means to the same end. So which ideas are solving the same problems for those users? So this is the time to talk with your team, talk about what those 2 favorite ideas of theirs are, what yours are, and see which ones relate and cluster them together. And this is how we start to come up with stronger idea systems, we call them. So ideas that come together to become an actual product.
And by clustering, what we really mean is take ideas that are similar and match them up into the core of that idea.
We're finding most interesting that we want to use. So the thing to keep in mind here is that this whole process isn't about today. And whichever cluster you pick, it doesn't really matter. What you want to be able to do is build these skills so you can bring them back to your team. So as a group, just pick out whichever cluster that you guys are all pretty much mostly interested in. And if it's not your favorite one, that's okay. The point is you'll still get exposure to what this process is like and how you can bring it back to your team. So let's take just 20 seconds to go ahead and figure out which cluster you guys want to work on today. We're going to move on to the next section. So you're actually going to skip forward 2 slides to one that's called Hero, Dragon, Weapon, Treasure. So we should all be on Hero, Dragon, Weapon, Treasure. So you'll find one of the most effective ways to communicate your ideas and start to illustrate them is through storytelling. A really incredible power that lots of great designers have. So IDEO, when people talk to them about how do they find a great designer to join their team, their #1 answer is they find people that can tell great stories. So this is a really simple system for putting together a very basic story called Hero, Dragon, Weapon, Treasure. We're going to identify each one of these areas for your product. So the first one is Hero. So who is your user? So what kind of person are we trying to attack with this product that we're making? The second one's going to be, what is your dragon? What is the problem that you guys are solving? Third one, what is the weapon? So what is the thing or product that you're making? And then lastly, what is the treasure? What is the payoff that they're going to get afterwards? So let's take a quick 20 seconds to figure out who your hero is. So quickly discuss amongst your group who your hero is. So now that we have these 4 elements, what we're going to go through is we want to talk quickly about, let's see. The hardest part as a designer that you'll face, which is getting feedback. So now that you've created something, it's time to start iterating. And it's time to start getting some feedback on what people are actually thinking of the thing you've built. So lots of times this will be after you've built some sort of prototype, a wireframe of a product, and you want to show it to a user. The hardest part that a lot of designers miss is making sure you get really good feedback. And to do that, we need to set this up as an experiment. So anytime we build something, it should be helping us answer some sort of question so we can learn more about what we're building and those users we're building for. And to do that, we need to voice our hypotheses. So here we have a really simple experiment planning sheet where we're going to go through and we're going to talk about what we're planning on doing, what we think people will do as a result, what we will need to test, so what are our assumptions, the things we think we know, and what are some really cheap and fast ways we can test this out. So let's take the Flask example one here. So if we do this, this is a thing that we're planning on doing. In this case, it's building a product. It could also be a service, maybe a car parking service. So if we build a spill-proof coffee mug, that's the thing we're planning on doing, what do we expect people will do? We expect people will buy our spill-proof coffee mug and use it while they're working on with their computers. Okay, great. So what are some of the assumptions? What are the things that we're basing this idea on that we don't actually know? Well, we're assuming that people know that they need a spill-proof coffee mug. Or it might even be just as basic that we're assuming that people drink coffee while they work on their computers. So the thing here is, what are those big assumptions that we're making that we actually don't know? Maybe we're assuming that people use coffee mugs and they don't use paper cups. So these are all total assumptions. So now that we know what those assumptions are, we want to figure out cheap and fast ways that we can test this. And the thing that is key here is it could be anything from building something, or it might just be asking some questions to great people. So in the case of the coffee mug, it could be as simple as, well, a really cheap way we could figure this out is we could give people a paper version of this cup to see if they would actually use it. Another valid way would be, we can test this out just by talking to a lot of people and seeing if they actually drink coffee while they work. So what's a really simple way that we can test out our assumption? So by basing this this step on assumptions, we can start getting a seat at that table where we're actually talking about data and facts. So let's go ahead and go through this process and let us know if you have any questions. The assumptions does 2 things. It does 1, helps us figure out what kind of prototypes we want to make, and then 2, helps us know about what other small little design decisions that we can make to make our products better. Does that make sense? And then anybody have any small experiments that they thought they could set up to test out their hypotheses? Anybody? Raise your hand if you weren't able to get an assumption. Or I'm sorry, get to an experiment. You guys have an experiment?
You're selling CRM solution, right? So first assumption is that smaller businesses will use a CRM solution. And of course, we are not sure because CRM normally is for big businesses. Second assumption is this CRM will help you grow your business also. So experiment, the first one is very easy. Just go and interview. Hey, are you using any CRM? This one will give us an idea, where the small businesses are. Second one is a bit difficult to do it, but because we want to see whether it will help grow business or not. So it needs some time. So maybe we choose certain pilot, small businesses, give them for free, but take them in return. You would like to measure, you improve your leads or whatever. So you use it, it's like 3 months, 6 months, whatever. Then only we know that, yeah, there are some statistics to prove that it will help grow your business.
Okay. Were you able to come up with any actual experiments that you could use to test this, or any experiments that you could do?
This is one of the experiments.
Okay. So the example up here was a CRM tool, and a couple of their assumptions was that small companies will actually use a CRM tool, and one of their unknowns was if people are going to use it over time. Is that correct? So they were talking about a couple of different experiments that you could use, and this is where it becomes challenging. Like, how do you let somebody try out a CRM tool that they don't know actually works? So we'll point to a couple of references that I think can help you start to explore this prototyping space, where there's just a whole bunch of different ways that you can prototype and start doing small things like this. So we're going to keep on moving, and we're actually going to move past gather feedback right now. And we're going to go right into some... We're going to go right into the project summary. So a key thing that we've been talking about today is getting to this 1,000 no's is about making stuff, whatever it may be, whether it's a small thing, a small experiment, whether it's a small wireframe, whether it's a paper version of a spillless cup, and then iterating on it, so going over and over. And we want to be making sure that we're actually understanding that we're iterating and moving forward. And one of the best ways to do that is to do these quick project summaries. So this is a way to go through and talk about the thing that we thought about before, the thing that we think about now, and what we're going to do next because of it. So this seems kind of silly, but I think one of the magical powers of a designer is that they make it okay to be wrong. And it's not about being right all the time. It's about continuously learning about the product you're making and the people you're building for. So let's quickly go through this exercise. So first, you're going to write down what are the things that you initially thought about. After looking at some of your assumptions, what are the things that you now think? Maybe different things that you feel like you have to do that you didn't realize before. And then lastly, what are you going to do next?
And we'll take just a minute on this one. So don't worry about being too concrete or comprehensive. Just think very, very, very concisely. What's the shortest version of these things for you?
And for this exercise, we'll work as individuals. So this is just a time for you to write down for yourself the kind of things that you picked up by going through these exercises that will change the things you do next. So we're going to wrap up this exercise. A couple great questions that we just got from, I'm sorry, your name was? Deep in the front row. One was, okay, can I use this process for products as well as projects? And the idea was, when we're putting these together, we're trying to make sure they were ones that you could both use for designing an entire product as well as specific either features or projects. So you could use things like the 5E model for what's it like in, excuse me, in a day with Nestle, or you could just talk about what it's like with instant coffee. Google actually uses this with some of their startups that they're working with. So they worked with a coffee company where they didn't look at the entire coffee company. They just looked at the website. What's the experience look like with that website? Let's use the same exact ideation process to come up with a bunch of ideas. And then they used it to actually redesign this company's website. So you can use it on all scales. The second question was, well, do people actually use it? Companies like Google do. Companies like Doblin, a really big design consultancy, do. And do they use this for actual idea generation? Yes. And they often use it in conjunction with a way to also gather those random ideas that you have in your shower and bring them back to this process. So definitely, this is definitely part of the process. It's also about letting those little serendipitous moments happen as well, too.
You know, mentioning Google, so Google Ventures put out this post about the 5-step design sprint process. I'm sure some of you guys have seen. This is a super, like, massively abbreviated version of something similar. The designers at Google Ventures meet with 200 startups a year in their portfolio. And 200 times a year, they make their startups go through this process, whether it's for working on a single feature or an entire business model to help them to refine it. And think about it this way. Every time you do this, you have a guaranteed chance of making the thing you're working on a little bit better, however big that thing is. You can do this in an hour or 2 hours like we just did for a small feature. You can do this in 6 months for something really, really big. The only difference is that instead of having 8 ideas, you might have 200 ideas, and it'll just take way longer to cluster them and find these things. But hopefully this will have put some muscle memory in you guys about what it feels like to go through these steps so that you'll be able to spot when someone is coming up with an idea, but you don't know why, or when someone's got an insight, but they haven't really turned it into something that you can use, like a how might we. And you'll start noticing in your meetings that people are talking about things that don't fit into a process or that don't fit into a structure. And you'll be able to come in and say, well, you know what? Actually, guys, let's ideate a little bit more. Or you see those ideas? Let's not just go for the first one. Let's come up with a few more and cluster them into something a bit bigger. Think of these as just little tools that you can apply day by day. There's no silver bullet in design. It's just a few frameworks that you can apply and that you know will give you a better chance of success.
Yeah, that's really well put. One tool that we breezed over that I think is also really powerful for this is we've mostly been talking about these pictures. What are some of these assumptions we can take? There's a great tool called the simple generic value proposition. How many of you guys have run into something like this before? A value proposition generator? So this is a really tool. So you've come up with an idea. Now let's just make sure we know what we're talking about. So this is where you just go through and you talk about who's the product for, what's the problem you're solving that we want, and that's what we want to keep on coming back to. What are we providing? What does it do? And how is it different from everything out there?
So just to wrap up, keep these worksheets, dig them out if ever you're looking for just a little bit of spice to add. And we've got a little bonus for you that we're not going to go through now, but we wanted to make sure we put together, and we'll hand out these slides. You'll have access to them. Just a few simple things that we'll be able to look at. Just 10 simple examples from Nielsen Norman, the Nielsen Norman group, Don Norman, Jacob Nielsen. They're usability experts. They've been doing this for 20, 30 years. They have 10 principles that are incredibly useful. And I suggest that you guys look at this afterwards. And, there's massive lists of resources. Don't look at those. Just sign up for these 4 things. And then look at all those other things. Because design is something that takes a while to learn. You can't just put it into a 2-hour workshop. But there's a Bible. Apple, Google put out guidelines for how to design for their platforms. In 1987, Apple put out the first version of their human interface guidelines. And these are widely considered just the Bible of how you design good or great software. And it's just full of really great little examples. And you can get them on Google website, Apple website. If you read those, you'll be in like the 90th percentile because most people actually don't read these. Sign up for a newsletter called sidebar.io, which gives you 5 articles a day about design, UI, UX. Just doing that and reading those every day you'll learn something incredibly useful. And what we've noticed is that Sidebar is kind of the center of the design conversation. So it's got these repeated back and forths between points of view, and it's just a really great way of staying up to date. Sign up for hackdesign.org, which will send you every week some useful articles and like mini lessons around a theme. And finally, if you're looking for examples, pattern libraries are fantastic. So this is a really, really good one. whenever a new app comes out, they'll just screenshot it and just categorize the different parts of it. So it's a great way if you're looking for design inspiration or looking to judge design. Just keep track of it and take a look at it, and you'll quickly get a sense of where things are going. And you know, what I suggest is just look at these things every so often, sign up for the newsletters. It's really just about continuously being in touch with the best thinking and the best ideas. And obviously, you can tweet at us, get at us. Our contact details will be available. And we'd love to answer questions afterwards, or if you sign up for office hours, talk to you a little bit longer. But either way, thank you so much for coming. It was really great hanging out with you guys this morning.
All we could give you today and yesterday was an exposure. So you have these 5 superpowers. You're now aware of the things, the crafts that you need to work on. There's seeing, there's iterating, there's framing, there's making, and there's riffing. You have the resources to turn to, and you have these processes you've run through one time. So you have a couple more days together. I invite you guys to run into each other and ask each other about the things you built. Tell them about the things that you're thinking about building, and use that as an opportunity to practice getting honest feedback from other people.